What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you today, bringing you our top 12 Dynasty running backs. We're talking veterans today. We've been talking rookies for the last, 2-3 months now. So we're going to get into some of the Dynasty running backs, how their values have changed, how we see their values going forward, and, parsing through some of the tiers that we see separating these guys. So, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well. And yeah, as Corey mentioned, you guys would have been seeing this video following the quarterback rankings, which would have been posted yesterday. And yeah, just fired up. But before we really go into any rankings or talking about the tiers in itself, I want to make this abundantly clear to you guys watching this.
How about we make the intro abundantly clear first?
Let's do that. Okay, so as I was mentioning before the intro, you guys have to view these rankings and kind of take the numerical face value of them with a grain of salt, because we're talking about Dynasty fantasy football here. We're not talking about redraft, where you look at the year one output and base your rankings off of what you expect that following year. In Dynasty, you have to really balance a number of things. You have to balance the age. You have to balance the structure of your team. You have to really balance what you value. Would you rather go more in on year one? Would you rather have a team that's younger and can be sustainable for the next few years? That's how we're really going to balance this. And you're going to see multiple times in our rankings, even in our tiers, that there's going to be guys that are more win now focused. There's going to be guys that are more younger focused. And quite frankly, depending on who to pick, has to do with how you first structured your team. So who you picked in the first round. We're going to be talking about Barkley versus Taylor, as you guys will see. Depending on who you pick there is ultimately going to really course the rest of your draft based solely on matching your overall peaks. So what you want to do in Dynasty is, if you have a bunch of 25, 26-year-old players that are willing and ready to win now, you want to have more of a win now team. But if you have 22-year-olds, you can kind of have a bunch of guys like, let's say Taylor, Gibson, etc. later, as you'll see. And you'll have a balanced roster that really will compete at the same time together and peak at the same time together. So that's a general philosophy. If you guys want more information on that, I'm sure in the link of this description, you will see the Attacking Dynasty video that I did over with Mikey a couple months ago. And that's a really good video for you guys to really contextualize these tiers and understand how the valuation works.
Yeah, and it's your own personal preference too, right?
Yeah.
Like I personally am always a win now type of Dynasty player. I don't like rebuilding. I've never once gone into a Dynasty startup and been like, hey, you know what? I'm going to trade back in the startup a bunch of times, collect future firsts, and take young players. It's just not my philosophy. I like trying to win right now in every league that I'm in. So for me, a guy like a conversation like Zeke Elliott versus J.K. Dobbins, it's all going to depend on if you're rebuilding or if you're contending. And obviously, at that point in the draft, you probably won't know yet, right? Because it's your second round pick or something like that. So you got to make that decision right then and there if you're going to contend or rebuild based on what you did in the first round. So yeah, it's a lot of it is personal preference as well. If you like contending right away, you don't like wasting money. Like I don't like wasting money. You just pick the older asset, but is going to probably be more productive right away for you.
For sure. Basically looking at it as maybe the younger guys might have more long-term value, but if you want to win now, you're going to take the guys who are going to give you that year one output. So that being said, let's talk about a guy that really offers both. And to us and to the rest of really the entire community is the clear 101 amongst running backs. And that's going to be Christian McCaffrey. I mean, he's still only 25 years old. He is the centerpiece of that Carolina Panthers roster. And what he does is just next level. I mean, yes, he missed all but 3 games this past year. But even in the 3 games that he played, he was still the same Christian McCaffrey that we saw in 2018 and 2019, where, quite frankly, he had the second most fantasy points ever. Last year, he actually outproduced what he was doing in 2019. In 2019, he averaged 25.8 half PPR points per game. Last year, he was actually averaging 27.3 half PPR points per game. I mean, what he does for you from a pure floor and ceiling mixture. I mean, this is a guy who, when he's on his game, is going to have 230, 240 carries while also producing 120 plus targets at the running back position. We saw very well 2019. Nearly 1,400 rushing yards and over 1,000 receiving yards. That is almost unheard of at the running back position. And as an overall generational fantasy asset, which is what Christian McCaffrey is, can we not just brush him to the side because he missed all but 3 games last year? Because when this guy is on the field, we've seen him being able to absolute dominate matchups. There's nobody in the real position quite like Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, and injuries happen to everybody. I'm not holding the injury against Christian McCaffrey, nor should you. He hasn't had a history of injuries in his career. This is really just a kind of a one-off thing where, the Bucs, I think it was the Bucs that injured him. They got to him. He had a high ankle sprain, which is a tough scene for running backs. We saw it the previous year with Saquon Barkley and Alvin Kamara. It's hard to come back from a high ankle sprain like that. So Christian McCaffrey, I expect him to totally be back to, his usual self. Nothing's really changed about the situation. You can even argue the situation got better with the addition that Sam Darnold brings to the offense. I think at least from a ceiling perspective, he has the offense has a higher ceiling with Christian McCaffrey back and with Sam Darnold operating the offense as opposed to Teddy Bridgewater. So I think second year in Matt Rule's system, you bring in Terrace Marshall, you got DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson still playing well. It's wheels up for Christian McCaffrey. I think the Panthers are going to be a little better than some people think too, if that's anyone's concerns with CMC. I think going forward, they're going to be a better team.
We even saw last year, because again, he missed weeks 3 to 8 following his week 2 injury. But we saw, despite missing that time in between, when he came back in week 9, he was not eased in. They didn't just say, oh, yeah, no, Christian, take it easy. You're coming back from a pretty serious injury. We'll let you settle down. No, he came back and had 28 touches. Yes, yeah. 28 touches.
What was his snap count in that game?
Ridiculous. He had 70% snaps.
Which is probably eased in for Christian McCaffrey, but it's not for any other running back in the league.
For reference, before he got hurt, because in week 2, obviously he got hurt against the Bucs, but in week 1, when he was fully healthy entering the season, had a 28.5 PPR output against the Raiders, he had a 97% snap.
Which is exactly why Christian he's a unicorn, man. This is the way Christian McCaffrey has been for Dynasty. Don't shrug him off just because of the injury. On to the next guy. Another what I would consider generational prospect, but we haven't quite seen that sustainable success yet, and I think that's going to end this year. Saquon Barkley is currently my RB2. He's your RB3, but he's our consensus RB tied for 2. First, there's physical talent, right? There's no greater physical talent of a prospect than Saquon Barkley that I've ever seen. I was, old enough to understand football enough when Adrian Peterson came out of school. Second, there's the volume and the workload that Saquon Barkley has commanded anytime he's been on the field healthy. 21 opportunities. I know it's just one game last year, but with Jason Garrett calling the shots in that offense, we saw him get 24 opportunities, including 9 of them being targets last year. So the ACL is concerning. It was early in the season. I'm not overly concerned about it. And this is a freak physical specimen we're talking about. I'm not concerned for Barkley I'm not concerned for Barkley from an injury perspective. And I think from an offensive standpoint, this offense got better, a lot better from last year. We're talking about an offense that added Kenny Golladay. We have Nate Solder coming back from his opt-out. We have Andrew Thomas, who was a rookie last year. He should improve in his second year. And we have Kadarius Toney, who they drafted in the first round. So from an offensive perspective, the focus of a defense is still going to be stopping Saquon Barkley. But this is a team that will definitely improve from the 31st scoring offense last year. Only the Jets were worse scoring points last year than the New York Giants. So with the addition of Barkley coming back, which will obviously help them score points, they should return to the 19th highest scoring offense that they were in 2019, or the 16th highest the last time Saquon was fully healthy in 2018 in his rookie season. So those 2 receivers being added on top of the fact that the offense should improve, Daniel Jones hopefully can take a step forward. And if that happens, then you got a long-term security thing with Daniel Jones as well, which from a dynasty perspective, we'd like to see from Saquon as his young quarterback get better.
Yeah, for sure. When you're talking about Saquon Barkley, in his first 2 years in the NFL, he had 121 targets as a rookie in 16 games, and as a sophomore had 73 in the 13 games he played. You're getting elite. You're getting elite receiving production with him, matched with arguably one of the most talented runners of the football we've seen come out in quite some time, as you mentioned. If this guy is healthy, given his opportunity and given his talent, he's very well in this top 3. And you mentioned it basically, but these tiers in terms of the top 3. So Christian McCaffrey, we both have in the tier 1. He's untouchable in terms of fantasy football running backs. The tier 2 is really 2 guys for us. And Saquon Barkley is going to be your 2. We're going to talk about my 2 in a second. But It just goes to show you that this is really a tier after McCaffrey where you can debate. If you go Saquon Barkley, you can kind of commit to that win now type of mentality. And if you go to the next guy on the list, you still have the flexibility to kind of build a young team. But that being said, we'll quickly close off on Barkley.
And the last thing that we got to take into account with Saquon Barkley is the fact that this guy is a stone cold lock for 70-yard touchdowns a year. Like the type of week winning output that you can get from Saquon because he has that breakaway speed, that breakaway ability that Christian McCaffrey has, but not to the degree of Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley is a week-winning type of back. He's the perfect back to play in DFS because you know he can break off those huge plays. That's one thing that people discount with other players. They're like, he needs big plays to, like Raheem Mostert, for example, he needs big plays to be really fantasy relevant. But with Saquon, it's just a cherry on top for him.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I mean, Saquon Barkley, and any given play, you mentioned it with Travis Etienne when we were doing the rookie prospects. On any given play, Saquon Barkley is running 85 yards down the field for a touchdown. That's just the level of dynamic ability he has. And we can go to the number 3 on this list because, quite frankly, he showed that dynamic ability in the stints this year as a 22 or 21-year-old rookie with the Colts. And Jonathan Taylor's my RB2 in Dynasty. Call me crazy in the comments right now all you want, but the way I view this is if you go into the draft and say, listen, like, I'm going to trade future picks. I want to build a win now ready team. You can take Saquon Barkley. I fully understand that. And he's still a young asset. He still should be appreciated given the talent, given the fact that, quite frankly, like this is a guy who is a generational prospect. But if you want to go with Jonathan Taylor and you want to say, okay, I have a top 5 pick, let me just retool, build a 22, 23-year-old team. Jonathan Taylor, the way I look at it, is one of the few running back assets in Dynasty that you can clearly say, okay, this guy's going to play at least for the next 3-4 years. Because quite frankly, you mentioned Saquon Barkley, Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb. Can you definitively say to me that they're going to make it not only to their second contract, play into their second contract, and not have to deal with any injuries in that time? Jonathan Taylor, I can say that because he still has those 3 years left on his rookie contract. And despite being as young as he is, 22 years old entering the season, finished as the RB6 in his rookie season, despite not really getting a full opportunity workload until really the midseason. And let's just talk about this. He was the RB8.5 PPR points per game of backs that played 12-plus games. And if you really extrapolate the last 5 games he played this past year, he averaged 23.2 half PPR points per game, which paced out to a full 16 would have been the RB1. And he also, in his lone playoff appearance, had 23 touches, 85 total yards, and a touchdown. And the way I look at him is he's a 22-year-old clear workhorse running back who has Nick Chubb level ability with a higher receiving ceiling. Like this is a guy who had 38 receptions in a rookie season, despite people saying and questioning his receiving ability. I think we could very well see that go into the 45, 50, 55 area for future years, given that he showed he was able to be capable and efficient with those touches. And quite frankly, the way we viewed Saquon Barkley after his rookie season, I can see Jonathan Taylor really developing into a younger version of that. And you're getting a discount with him considering that he's going to be the cheapest that you can get him now, whether that compared to if he breaks out again yet this year. So I fully think Jonathan Taylor is on his trajectory to being, quite frankly, after Christian McCaffrey's reign, probably the number 1 overall asset in Dynasty amongst the running back position.
Right. And if you guys need something to comment in this video, just comment quite frankly down below because Danny said it like 3 times the last minute.
Yeah, anyway. I get very pumped up. But yeah, Jonathan Taylor, absolute stud.
Right. Yeah. So that's the end of our top 3 running backs. That we just, like we said, there's a tier break after Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley for us. In our opinion, you can call us crazy in the comments. I know a lot of people are telling you to sell Saquon Barkley. I totally disagree with that advice, to be honest. I think total recency bias. Everyone's nervous about it because of the ACL tear. It's like we got years and years of recent history that ACL tears are not as scary as they used to be. They're not like that anymore, especially for a guy that is freaky like Saquon Barkley. So the 4th guy, again, you might call us crazy for this one. I don't think we're crazy. Alvin Kamara is our 4th rated running back for Dynasty purposes. I've talked about this before, and you're going to hear me talk about it again all throughout this offseason because this guy's going to get disrespected from a redraft perspective, from a Dynasty perspective. Do not fade Alvin Kamara. Nobody hates the New Orleans Saints more than I do. It's a known fact. I dislike this team with every fiber of my being. But the scary narrative that everybody is going to be talking about, the big, fantasy podcasts that have huge audiences, they're all going to talk about Alvin Kamara's splits with Taysom Hill. It's going to happen all offseason. I can already, see into the future. He wasn't receiving targets with Taysom Hill. That makes me worried about the quarterback competition, blah, blah, blah. One, Jameis will win this job. So let's start with that, first of all. Jameis is going to win this job. But even if he doesn't, let's say he doesn't win this job. Let's say Sean Payton's got this weird obsession with Taysom Hill, and he's going to start him over Jameis Winston. If you look at Drew Brees' injury and Alvin Kamara's injury, it completely coincided with one another. It was a huge coincidence. It was an unfortunate coincidence for Alvin Kamara's fantasy prospects, but it's a window of opportunity. Pardon?
You mean for the narrative around his fantasy?
Right. It's going to develop the narrative, but from your perspective, because you're listening to us talk about this, and you can do your own research on this as well. It's a window of opportunity that people are going to miss because they're going to look at the surface level narrative, right? Alvin Kamara, and I'm going to put this on the screen right now. He started to miss practice before the Week 9 game blowout win against the Buccaneers. Unfortunately for my team, they smoked us in Week 9. But right before that game, Alvin Kamara was on the practice report with a foot injury, right? And Week 9 comes and they beat up on the Bucs, and Alvin Kamara only played on 51% of the snaps in that blowout victory because he was limited during practice throughout the week. We got killed. So why would you play Alvin Kamara the whole time? Yeah. 2 weeks later, November 19th, as you can see on the date there, he missed practice with the same right foot injury that he had sustained 2 weeks previous, right? He sustained or re-aggravated, whatever the case is, on November 19th in practice. Now, if you look at his game logs, and I'll put this on the screen right now, November 22nd, which is 3 days after he re-aggravated that injury, they played the Atlanta Falcons. It also happened to be Taysom Hill's first start without Drew Brees. They played Atlanta, who had already fired their head coach, right? They were, tail spinning on way to potentially having a top 5 pick. Why, if you're Sean Payton, you're the head coach of this team, why would you risk the health of your star running back when your starting quarterback is already out with an injury, when you have a very capable backup in Latavius Murray? What I think, and you look at the next couple games here, he had a low snap share in that game and the next game against Denver, who, let's remember, had 0 quarterbacks to start that game. They had Kendall Hinton starting that game. And you have Taysom Hill as the quarterback, and everyone freaked out about Alvin Kamara not getting targets, right? That was the big hoopla. He got 1 target against Atlanta and 2 targets against Denver. But the reason for that was because he was injured, not because Taysom Hill was the starting quarterback. And the proof of that is once he was back to full health in week 14, which is Taysom Hill was still the starter of that game against Philadelphia. He got 10 targets in that game. So is Taysom Hill a downgrade for Alvin Kamara? Probably slightly from Drew Brees. And especially considering he might steal some goal line touches from him. But honestly, Taysom Hill steals goal line touches from him even when Drew Brees was the starter because Sean Payton used him in the red zone a lot. So the underlying point here is Alvin Kamara is just fine. And the weird thing is that recency bias is not going to carry Alvin Kamara because the last time we saw this guy, he scored 6 touchdowns for us and won me a fantasy championship. Yeah. So to me, he's going to get disrespected in redraft, in dynasty. Whatever the case is, take the value. He should be the 103, in my opinion, in redraft leagues. And if he's not the 103, then take wherever he's going as a value.
Dude, and if it gets announced going into the season that Jameis Winston is the starting quarterback, I would move him up.
I kind of hope he doesn't get announced as the starting quarterback so that he continues to fall.
No. And what I'm saying is, if he was, I would move him up to 102, as good as Dalvin Cook is. We're going to get into him in a second. That is just the level of output you get from a guy in Alvin Kamara, especially in any type of PPR format. You mentioned the stretch week 13 to 15 when he was hurt. He had 6 total targets in those 3 games. In the following 3 games, he had 21 total targets. So can we stop peddling this narrative that Taysom Hill does not throw it to him? It was because Alvin Kamara was freaking hurt, and the Saints are not a dumb organization to just throw him out on the field.
Right. He didn't practice. He was on, what was the snap count that he had? It was 49%, 48%, and then 62% the 1 week that he came back against the Falcons. And I mean, he wasn't totally involved there. But he did have 15 rushing attempts, which was his 3rd most of the season. So he was back to a full workload once he came back from the foot injury. And it just coincidentally happened to coincide with Drew Brees also being hurt.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you already know this offseason, people are going to be going on their RotoViz, getting their splits, say, oh yeah, this is why Taysom Hill's bad for Alvin Kamara. Going to be peddling it out on their cookie cutter fantasy football podcast. That's why you listen to us and you get the clarity, you get the context behind it, because Alvin Kamara is still the bona fide superstar in fantasy football. That being said, let's go into another guy who was the RB2 last year. Actually, I think in PPR, he was the RB2 solely behind Alvin Kamara because of that 6 touchdown performance. That's going to be Dalvin Cook. I mean, the big concern with with Dalvin Cook going into last year and why he fell in your redraft leagues was because of the contract situation, the health. He kind of got bumped down, but everybody knew that if he stayed healthy, he would have this RB1 potential. And we saw they signed him up. He played the season, and he was on a points per game basis the RB1. I mean, the lingering concern that I have with him and why he's only RB5 in Dynasty, however, is the health that we've seen with him over these multiple years. And I'm kind of sort of questioning what's going to be happening because Gary Kubiak did depart on how the actual offense is going to change. If you guys actually saw the Amir Smith-Marset video I made in the Deep Sleepers, I basically talked about how they let Kyle Rudolph go, but didn't really bring in an adequate tight end to be that number 2 behind Irv Smith, which suggests to me, are they going to be running more 11 personnel sets? Are they going to be steering off of the heavy 12 personnel that we saw a lot from last year? Because if that's the case, that's going to affect his rushing output to a certain degree with more receivers on the field. So overall, I mean, this is still a guy that, in terms of a win now asset, is probably going to be the number 3 overall producer this year, in my opinion. But because of the situation, because of the health, because of the uncertainty with Kirk Cousins and really the organizational direction, I'm going to be taking him no higher than 5th.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. You mentioned like Kirk Cousins is getting berated on talk shows left and right right now.
Justin Jefferson berated.
Yeah, like we have no idea what the situation is with that. And from a dynasty perspective, we can't forget that this guy was a health concern. Like I know he stayed healthy last year, but you got to remember the 3-4 years prior to last year, Dalvin Cook was always a guy that would go down week 12 or something like that. So it's still a concern. It could happen to any running back, but we got to keep it in mind for Dalvin Cook that it could happen, you know, a little bit more frequently. And we can't just go completely off the recency bias that he stayed healthy the whole season. And let's not forget that this is a running back now 1 year through his second contract too. So we have a situation where he's probably going to need to get another contract extension a year or two from now. And how many times do running backs get to a third contract in the NFL?
I mean, he stayed healthy for most of the season, but he still missed a game as well. Like, let's not take that away as well. Regardless, don't get me wrong. He's still awesome, even if he plays 14, 15 games, especially in a redraft standpoint. But from Dynasty, there's just so many lingering things to really take me
Things change quick for running backs in Dynasty, right? Like 2 years ago, we were taking Todd Gurley as the 101, or 3 years ago. So, Dalvin Cook, I'm not saying he's going to turn into Todd Gurley, but things change quick. Just because he's looked at as an elite asset right now doesn't mean he's going to be an elite asset 1 year from now, because he could have an injury-riddled season next year and be a 3rd, 4th, 5th round rookie Dynasty startup pick.
Yep, I fully agree. So with that being said, we can shift off of Dalvin Cook and go into our next back, and that's going to be Nick Chubb. So take it away with Nick Chubb here, Corey.
Yeah, so when you look at Nick Chubb, he was absolutely phenomenal when he was on the field last year. The Kevin Stefanski rushing system that we all prayed and hoped that Nick Chubb would just be completely unleashed in that system absolutely happened. If you remove the game that Chubb left with his knee injury that he was out for a couple of weeks with last year, we saw a guy who averaged 18.65 PPR points per game in an offense that absolutely favored his style of running, and an offense that should improve, to be honest, or at least get out to a hotter start, because they were kind of, up and down to start the season, aside from the Cowboys game with the second year in the system. So with Stefanski coming in, new coaching staff, no COVID or no offseason because of COVID, Baker Mayfield and the offense should get out to a bit of a hotter start. This is a team that should win between 10 and 13 games this year. I think they're that good of a team, and they've made additions to their defense and their offense to bolster that status of being a top 5 team in the AFC. And the Browns run through Nick Chubb. They go as he goes. Nick Chubb is the engine of that team, of that offense. And if you pick Nick Chubb in fantasy, he probably won't be the RB1, right? I think we can both agree that he's probably not going to finish as the RB1 unless he had like a 20 touchdown season or something like that. But I'm absolutely comfortable projecting him as a fringe top 5 running back year in and year out. And long term, I'm not worried whatsoever about the fact that he's going to be a free agent after this year, because if you look over the past year, we've seen running backs get paid. We saw Joe Mixon, we saw Christian McCaffrey, Austin Ekeler, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, and Aaron Jones. All those guys signed contracts in the past calendar year, and Nick Chubb should be no different when he's up. Yeah,
I mean, when you're talking about Nick Chubb, really, he and Derrick Henry, who we're going to talk about next, are the only real 2 running backs in the league that you can tell me right now they're not going to catch more than 20, 25 passes, let's say hypothetically, which I do think Nick Chubb's ceiling is higher than that. And I won't bat an eye because I'll still take them, because let's be honest here, from a pure rushing ability and efficiency standpoint, Are there any really better aside from maybe Derrick Henry than Nick Chubb? I mean, this is a guy who has averaged over 5 yards per carry throughout his career, who quite frankly had 12 rushing touchdowns in 12 games last year while averaging almost 5.7. I mean, this is a guy who just knows how to run the ball. And you got a great offensive line with the Browns. You got a great running system with Kevin Stefanski in place. This is my pick to lead the league in rushing next year. I know Derrick Henry is going to be the popular pick, and we're going to talk about him next. But Nick Chubb has every capability to be that 15, 16, 1,700 yard back. And I think it's going to happen. So stay tuned. Number 6.
The reason I have Nick Chubb ahead of Derrick Henry, by the way, too, if some people were wondering, it's like, because I don't think Nick Chubb has ever finished ahead of Derrick Henry in a given season. But the reason I have him ahead is because Nick Chubb is 25 and Derrick Henry is 27. So that's a 2-year difference. Derrick Henry is already a year into his second contract, like I said, with Dalvin Cook. So how many times in an NFL season or in the NFL are you going to see a running back get a third contract, which is a concern? And Derrick Henry lost his offensive coordinator and 2 of the weapons on his offense to take some attention away from him. So I have more concerns about Derrick Henry than I do about Nick Chubb. You got to project forwards. You can't look back at what has happened historically. Projecting forward, I will take Nick Chubb over Derrick Henry in Dynasty.
Yep, I fully agree. And again, I currently have Henry at 6, Chubb at 7. They are literally splitting hairs, as you'll see many times be announced throughout this video. But I could talk about Derrick Henry, and it's really simple. You need a win now running back. You need a running back that you're almost positive is going to finish in the top 3 to 5 at the position and half. Quite frankly, even in full PPR, he was the 3rd overall running back last year. The catches or the passes do not matter for Derrick Henry because even on 19 catches, I mean, this is still a guy who rushed the ball nearly 380 times last year, had nearly 2,100 rushing yards and 17 touchdowns in the 16 games he played. This is just the bread and butter. He's going to get 20, 25 carries per game. You know what you're going to get. Maybe a little touchdown per bust, but when you're scoring 17 touchdowns, I don't really care if you're touchdown or bust because you're going to score touchdowns when you're a 6'3", 250-pound freight train like Derrick Henry is. And are there really any other running backs in the league that you can fully say are the identity of their team aside from Derrick Henry?
I just talked about one with Nick Chubb.
Okay, that's fair. But like him and
Christian McCaffrey, I would say, is probably the identity of his team. Saquon should be ideally in an ideal situation. I think Dalvin ideally is kind of one of those like guys too. But yeah, I agree with you. Derrick Henry is the guy that every defensive coordinator is scared of when they play the Tennessee Titans. 100%.
So I understand, again, if you're scared about the longevity, if you want to kind of go with a more so ascending value type strategy, I fully understand if you're going to fade Derrick Henry because he's in the tier with a bunch of younger guys as well. But if you're win now and you're in that mid-second round area and Derrick Henry staring at the face and say you locked up Saquon Barkley in the first round, you compare him with Derrick Henry, there should be nothing stopping you from doing that because that's the level of output you should get at least in this year, probably in the next 2 or 3 years with Derrick Henry. So with that being said, we can get into the next guy on the list. And who do we have at our 8? That's going to be Cam Akers. So you can take it away with Akers.
Yeah, real quick on Henry and Chubb, though, you might be able to get them both at the back end of the first round in a startup. So that would be a scary combo if you could do that. But Cam Akers, like you said, so we're transitioning, and this is the hard part about rankings, right? We got to go from a guy that has done it in Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb, and now we got to go to a guy who hasn't done it yet in Cam Akers, who's a younger guy who's like 21, 22 years old.
21, yeah.
The back half of the season where he was just incredible. He was probably one of the biggest league winners in fantasy last year. Akers had over 65% of the snaps and at least 22 touches in every game except for the New York Jets game where he left early after week 12 when he broke out against San Fran. So this is a guy that, you know, after the bye week, after the dust kind of settled, some of the injuries that happened within the Rams backfield, Sean McVay trusted this dude to carry the offense. And the biggest thing for RB workloads is coaching, right? And we've seen this coaching staff trust people with workhorse volume, right? They fed Todd Gurley RB1 type of volume a couple of years ago, and they feel comfortable doing it. And I think the most important time of the year, right? Cam Akers was very, very valuable in the playoffs as well. He received 46 carries and 3 targets over their 2 playoff games, including 28 carries against their biggest rival in the Seattle Seahawks. So, I mean, this is a guy that was absolutely thrusted into the workhorse role of Sean McVay's offense, and he got a 96% snap share against the Green Bay Packers in the last time that we saw this guy play when they were, you know, beaten out of the playoffs against Green Bay. So at that point, it really just comes down to talent. for Cam Akers, because if he plays well, if he continues to play well, shows out in camp and continues to impress, we could be talking about a running back that wins people championships in 2021, because in redraft leagues and dynasty leagues, this is a guy that you can consistently get in the second round. And if you think of it like Miles Sanders last year, except with a better offense, a more consistent quarterback with Matthew Stafford coming in, and a coaching staff that actually likes feature backs instead of uses a committee approach. With Matt Stafford in the fold, we could be talking about a 70+% opportunity share running back for one of the top 5 scoring offenses in the NFL.
Yeah, I fully agree. I currently have Cam Akers at, I believe, RB8 in my ranking. So I'm even higher on him than you are. And that simply goes to show they trusted this guy down the stretch. Again, you're going to be putting up the graphic on the screen, but the amount of sheer opportunity he got just closing out the season, I mean, it's absurd volume that you see here. So, I mean, if you guys can see, again, 21 carries, 29 carries, 15 carries, 21 carries in the playoff game. I mean, this guy is an absolute dynamic talent. And he finally got to show out at the end of the season. You mentioned the offense. If they are not a top 5 to 7 scoring offense in the NFL, I will be heavily surprised. So with that being said, like this is the type of area where you're comparing the sure things like a Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb to projecting forward and maybe getting a value because of their age with a guy like Cam Akers, a couple of other guys on our list coming up. But I absolutely love it. Cam Akers is an absolute stud and is very well in that early to mid second round type contention in your dynasty league draft. So that being said, we can go on to the next guy on this list. And similar to Derrick Henry, similar to Nick Chubb, kind of fits that win now type of mold. That's going to be Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, guys, there are going to be fantasy podcasts, fantasy Twitter really devaluing this guy. Oh, he's 25. Oh, he's washed up, blah, blah, blah. What are you going to do with Ezekiel Elliott? Do not let this guy fall to the end of the 3rd round, early 4th that I've seen in some mock drafts that people have done. Just insanity. Because let me make myself perfectly clear here. Completely clear. You guys take out your earphones, whatever. Plug in your earphones, whatever you got to do to hear me clearly. Ezekiel Elliott will not be disrespected entering the 2021 draft cycle. Yes, I understand. He struggled in 2020. He was only the RB 14.5 PPR points per game, but it would have really been difficult for any other running back in the league to live up to expectations on a team that lost both of their all-pro tackles to all but 2 games last year, talking about Lyle Collins and Tyron Smith, losing their all-pro center before the season even started, and missing other significant starters throughout the year in Zach Martin, Tyler Biadasz missing games. And, let me just not mention the fact that, he lost a top 5 quarterback in the league, franchise quarterback Dak Prescott after 5 games. I mean, this is a guy in the 5 games that he played with just Dak Prescott, not even the offensive line, just Dak Prescott, averaged 107.4 yards from scrimmage per game, 6 touchdowns in those 5 games, was averaging nearly 20 half PPR points per game, which only trailed Kamara, Cook, and Henry for running backs with even 4+ games played. And when you're actually looking at his receiving output, this is a guy who was averaging nearly 7.5 targets per game in an offense that was scoring 33 points per game. Like, let's not overthink it. From a win-now perspective, this is a guy who you could probably pair up with Saquon Barkley. You could pair up with Nick Chubb. You could pair up with Derrick Henry in the 3rd round of your drafts as your RB2. A guy that I'm perfectly confident in saying right now is going to be a top 5 to 7 running back in fantasy football this year. Fade at your own risk, but when this guy scores 15, 20 total touchdowns, has nearly 2,000 yards from scrimmage, and is back to his former form, I'll say I told you so.
Right, and don't let the number 21 jersey behind you fool you. Danny is a Dallas Cowboys fan, but I agree with you. Let me give the non-homer perspective, because a lot of people might bash you in the comments and say that you're a Dallas Cowboys fan and you're a homer. I agree with Danny. I have him at 10. I have him in the same spot you have him. So to me, it's not a big. It's people are overthinking it, man. Like they're gonna do the splits argument for Alvin Kamara, but they're not gonna do it for Ezekiel Elliott. It's gonna happen. And like you said, Ezekiel Elliott is 25. He's only 25 years old. He seems older than that, but he's only 25. So this is a guy that is going to be lumped with Derrick Henry as a 27-year-old running back, but he's not. He's the same age as Nick Chubb. He was in the NFL for 2 years before Nick Chubb got into the NFL, but This is still a guy that has 2, 3, 4-year viability as a RB1 or even an RB2, maybe at the back end of that kind of tenure that I just laid out. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think Zeke is going to be disrespected in dynasty drafts. I think he's probably going to be disrespected in redraft as well. So snag up the value. If he's on the board in the third round, he shouldn't be on the board.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's just crazy that he's actually falling to the third round in your startups right now for a guy who prior to last year, he ended up finishing as the RB9. Okay, whatever. We're going to go points per game, which was 14. Prior to that year, number 2 in 15 games. Number 13 in only 10 games played that year. Number 5 and number 3 in PPR. And this is a guy in those years averaged 20.6, 19, 19.4, and 17.8 points per game, respectively, in half PPR between those years. Do not fade him. Do not let him fall. Anyways, Corey, take it away with the number 10, and that's going to be Austin Ekeler, the pass catcher from the LA Chargers.
Yeah, right. And we're going to go from your brand guy to my brand guy. So Austin Ekeler, if you guys watched the channel last year, you know I was so high on Austin Ekeler. And I was literally heartbroken when he went down with injury because I think if he didn't go down last year, he was probably a top 5 running back in fantasy because the bona fide elite running back that I thought he could be, people are going to disregard him in startup drafts. They're going to think he's a little bit of a recency bias candidate as well, right? Because he was injured, because we didn't see him over the course of a full season. You're going to hear some narratives. Oh, he can't hold up to a full workload or whatever the case is. He suffered a freak injury. I watched the play. It was against my team.
Yeah.
His leg got rolled over on it. It was a freak play. It was a freak injury. And I will just absolutely scoop the value of Austin Ekeler in redraft and dynasty, whatever the case is. 64 targets in the 9 games that he played with Justin Herbert. If you extrapolate that across a 16-game sample size, that would equate to 114 targets. And then we're talking Christian McCaffrey territory with that kind of target volume from a running back. And Ekeler averaged 14.34 half PPR points per game, which would have equated to the RB10 in points per game in 2020. And again, he left a couple games early. I think he was limited in a game, Thursday Night Football or whatever. They came out and said he's not going to play the full game or whatever. So it's probably an even bigger number if you look at the games that he was actually playing the full time. A second year getting acclimated for his reigning offensive rookie of the year quarterback, plus potential positive regression from his own touchdown totals because he only scored 3 touchdowns last year.
I was just about to say that too.
Right. And one goal line touchdown too on 18 total attempts in 9 games played. So this is a guy that their offense should be better. They added what I consider a franchise left tackle at 13 in the draft. And they also got better and probably more healthy on defense. Eckler's under contract for the next few years, tied at the hip to Justin Herbert. Everybody was worried about the Tyrod narrative last year, right? Everyone was, he's not going to see that many targets. He doesn't throw to his running backs like Phillip Rivers does. Ekeler and the Chargers offense threw to their running backs at the 3rd highest rate in the NFL last year, 26%. And again, Ekeler missed half the season. So they were throwing to Kalen Ballage and random other running backs.
Justin Jackson.
As good of receivers as Austin Ekeler just because they like throwing to running backs. Yeah, it's a new regime in town, but I still expect them to throw to their running backs at a top 5 rate when Austin Ekeler is one of those running backs.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Justin Jackson shit. Let's just go over it real quick too. This guy averaged nearly 18 PPR points per game in the 9 games he played minus the Bucks game on 3 total touchdowns. 3 touchdowns. Even if he faces minor positive regression, let's just say, I know we hate throwing around that term, but this is a guy who had 11
give him 10 touchdowns on the season.
Yeah, he had 11 in 2019. I don't think it's all the way out there to say he can finish with 10 touchdowns.
Yeah, and he had Melvin Gordon in his backfield that year.
Yeah, he finished as the RB4 in PPR on 132 carries.
With the corpse of Phillip Rivers as his quarterback. Everything about Austin Ekeler screams he's going to regress positively because even if something I say is wrong, right? Even if he doesn't get as many targets as 114, like I said, chances are he's going to have more than the 3 touchdowns that he had last year to make up for that. And chances are the offense is going to be better than, 25th in the league in scoring points to make up for that. So everything about Austin Ekeler is set to be a project forward type of situation because we know that Justin Herbert is going to be at least as good as he was this year, if not better, in his second year.
100%. So with that being said, let's go to another project forward situation. And this is a guy, if I have any chance of getting in my startups, we're talking about the late 2nd, early 3rd round, about where he's going. I'm taking him there every chance I get. My RB9 in Dynasty now. And it's going to shock you. I'm a Cowboys fan. But Antonio Gibson, I am all in. We're talking. Okay, let's clarify this real quick. Okay?
All right, settle down. All
right, I'm excited. This is a guy who in weeks 1 to 10 last year, I talked about this yesterday when I was talking about the values with JD McKissic, but let's inverse that and say Gibson's going to get a bigger role on 3rd down, which I absolutely expect because we'll get into the quotes later on. But in weeks 1 to 10 last year, Gibson had 1 total snap One total snap, not even touch, not even target, not even opportunity. One total snap on third down. And he did not run a single route on third down in the whole season and had 8 total touches on third down. Again, we both really anticipate a roll bump for Antonio Gibson. This is a guy who, going into the season, Adrian Peterson said that Ron Rivera wants to run bell cow back. Maybe Gibson wasn't ready to accomplish that last year, but you best believe after a full year in the NFL, learning the system, gaining around him, he's going to come out and he's going to be ready.
He wasn't a running back in college. He didn't know how to pass protect because he played wide receiver in college. So that was probably why he wasn't on the field on third down. And his PFF grades in pass protection reflect that.
Yeah, and I was going to get into that too, because despite not having any third down usage, he was the RB13 in 14 games played. For a guy with no experience as a full-time running back last year to come in as a rookie, as a third down freaking rookie, to garner 214 opportunities and nearly 1,100 yards from scrimmage in 14 games, despite having absolutely no presence on third down for the majority of the season, is just absurd. Now let's look at the Washington situation as a whole. They add a new blend of improved weapons core. They had a major improvement at quarterback. Because let's be honest here, Taylor Heineke, Alex Smith, Dwayne Haskins, Ryan Fitzpatrick shits on every single one of them. Okay? And now we look at a guy who is developing as a running back, is getting a system around him that should be able to put up a lot more points, and still was able to produce 11 rushing touchdowns in 14 games this year. Call me crazy right now. Call me bold right now. I think he has a valid chance of leading not only the NFC East in rushing touchdowns, not only the NFC in touchdowns, leading the NFL in rushing touchdowns next year. Remember the last time Ron Rivera had a talented running back who wasn't used as a full-time workhorse the year prior, back in 2017? Oh, yeah, I kind of remember that guy. You know, he just so happened to go on to break fantasy football records the following 2 years. I mean, I'm putting my stamp on Antonio Gibson now. Out of all these guys outside of the top 8 dynasty running backs, this is the guy who I think by this time next year is going to be a widely regarded top 5 overall dynasty running back and is going to be going in the mid-first in every single one of your dynasty drafts. I'm putting my stamp on it right now. Do not fade Antonio Gibson after he finishes. Bold take right now. He's going to be a top 5 running back this year.
Yeah, no, it does. I'm totally on board with this. You guys remember the Sleepers video that did so well on this channel? On that video, Danny talked about it already, but that quote, when Adrian Peterson got released, Josina Anderson, I guess they had like a phone call together or whatever, and Adrian Peterson said word for word that they wanted one running back to be the passing down back, the early down back. They wanted one running back to do it all. And the reason I believe Adrian Peterson is because Scott Turner was their offensive coordinator, son of Norv Turner, the guy that turned Christian McCaffrey into a full-time workhorse who played 99% of the snaps in 2018 and 19. Also the guy that had Marshawn Lynch and Adrian Peterson playing at those levels back in their days too. So this is the next dude. This is the guy that's next up. Do not pass this guy. If he's on the board in the second round of startups, do not pass this guy. If he's on the board of second round of redrafts, third round of redrafts, he will be my RB2 in every single redraft league that I'm in.
100%. And let's just kind of like also look at the parallel of Christian McCaffrey, because this is the exact same situation. Get this. In 2017, as a rookie, he was the standard RB15, PPR RB10 in the 16 games he played. Similar to what Gibson was on only, get this, 230 opportunities, similar to Gibson. The following year, from 230 opportunities, he went up to a grand total of 343. Yes, same coach, same coaching staff. Ron Rivera, Norv Turner. We're talking about Ron Rivera and Scott Turner in Washington right now. Do not fade Antonio Gibson. I cannot talk about this guy enough. That being said, go on to another sophomore running back. By the way, if you guys made it this far in the video, comment sophomore running backs, because they are the wave in these dynasty rankings. They are taking over the league. And let's talk about the other one, the one that's going to be on one of the highest potent rushing offenses in the entire league. Take it away with J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, J.K. Dobbins, to me, the argument's quite simple for him. Yeah. Mark Ingram's a free agent, right? He's gone. He's actually not a free agent. He's on the Texans now, I think. But he opens up 80 more opportunities to this already very highly volumed rushing offense in the NFL. Let's not forget that this is the most efficient rushing offense in the NFL for running backs specifically because of the presence of Lamar Jackson. Everybody has to respect that as a defense. This is a guy that turned 152 total touches last year, or just over 10 per game, into 925 yards from scrimmage and 9 rushing touchdowns, averaging above 6 yards per touch during the process. And I tweeted this out and it got a lot of traction. A lot of people really found this interesting. J.K. Dobbins averaging 6 yards per touch on less than a 50% opportunity share of the Ravens running backs last year. So he got less than 50% of the total work for the Ravens running backs. This excludes Lamar Jackson, doesn't include him. Only 2 other running backs had done that since 2013 as rookies, David Johnson and Alvin Kamara. The following season, in their sophomore years, David Johnson was by far and away the running back 1 in fantasy that year, and Alvin Kamara was a top 3 running back in fantasy. I wrote an article for the Scouts basically outlining this entire process where I talked about not only Dobbins, but I talked about Gibson and Swift as well, who are poised for volume increases. And in that article, I broke down historical trends of efficient rookies, and Dobbins, based on his extreme efficiency last year, is set to see a large boost in volume equivalent to a 61% opportunity share, or a 70, between 61 and 71% opportunity share based on the bump that Kamara, David Johnson, Miles Sanders, a number of other running backs have received in the past couple of years. So we saw Mark Ingram 2 years ago finish as a top 10 option with 200 carries. He had 200 carries that year. And pretty much the reason he finished as a top 10 option was on the back of touchdowns. And J.K. Dobbins will be a more efficient, more effective, more receiving volume, hopefully, but we don't know that for sure. But I'm not even talking about that right now. He'll get that value on the goal line. J.K. Dobbins' 71% success rate and 9 rushing touchdowns. Remember, he had 9 rushing touchdowns on the season. All 9 of them came in the red zone. And he ranked number 1 in the NFL in success rate among running backs with 20-plus red zone attempts. Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Jeff Wilson, and Nick Chubb were 2 to 5. Will J.K. Dobbins carry the ball 300 times? Absolutely not. He's not getting 300 carries because Lamar Jackson's going to run the ball 150, 180 times during the season, and Gus Edwards will probably get 120 carries too. But he's not going to catch 180, or he's not going to catch 81 passes like Alvin Kamara catches either. But he is a lock, and I mean a lock, for 10 to 15 rushing touchdowns next year.
Easily. And if he's giving you 10 to 15 touchdowns, just off that alone, he's going to be a top 15 running back. And then when you add the factor that could he catch more passes with the 80 vacated opportunities from Mark Ingram? Could he see an uptick in rushing carries per game? Maybe they lean on Lamar a little less. Maybe they distribute the carries a little bit more towards J.K. Dobbins, given he was a rookie last year. I fully agree. I think J.K. Dobbins is an absolute stud. The fact that he's even this low just goes to show how much these young running backs are taking over now. Honest to God, I currently have a tier from 6 to 10 and then 11 to 15. But seriously, between 10 and 11, even between 6 and 15, I view them almost equally, honestly.
Right, which is why we preach getting these guys early, right? Because they dry up quick. Guys that I feel this confident in, with between Dobbins and Gibson and Swift, who is not even making this top 12, which is just showing you how
we'll get into them too.
Rich this area is. But that's basically my point with these guys. And J.K. Dobbins, to me, he reminds me so much of Aaron Jones, not from a play style standpoint, but how he's going to receive his fantasy volume and how he's going to get his fantasy value, coming out into becoming a top 5 running back, because Aaron Jones needed 16 touchdowns to be a top 5 running back. But last year he finished, I don't even remember where he finished. He probably finished in the top 8 last year.
He finished RB5 in 14 games off of only 11 total touchdowns.
Right. And Aaron Jones catches probably a little bit more passes than J.K. Dobbins will catch. But again, I think Lamar Jackson only had 7 rushing touchdowns last year. They don't run him in the red zone. They use running backs in the red zone. They use Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins in the red zone. And J.K. Dobbins, 9 rushing touchdowns last year on only 162 carries.
Ridiculous efficiency. So with that being said, you guys made it this far in the video. You would have seen the top 12. Let's go into the honorable mentions, really cracking out our top 15. And we'll each talk about the guy that we have in our top 12s that kind of got left off. So in terms of 13 to 15 in order, given our consensus, we currently have it as DeAndre Swift 13, Najee Harris 14, and Aaron Jones 15. Again, I'll briefly mention right now, Aaron Jones is at 15 simply due to the fact that he's older than these guys and that Aaron Rodgers' impending situation is just such a mess that I do not want to deal with it if I'm talking and splitting hairs between ultimate production between them. Anyways, let me get into DeAndre Swift, my current RB11 in Dynasty for a little bit, and why I have him there. So when you're talking about DeAndre Swift, I mean, basically echoing everything I said with Antonio Gibson, kind of apply it to DeAndre Swift. The only difference I see here is the situation. I mean, we're not going to compare the situation of the Washington football team right now to the situation of the Lions, because if I had to bet right now, the Lions may very well end up with a top 2 overall pick in the NFL draft. It's that bleak. However, when you're talking about the compound factors of DeAndre Swift in terms of the talent, in terms of the opportunity, in terms of the workload, he checks every single box you look for. Again, the talent is there. He was a PPR RB18 in the 13 games he played last year, while garnering 4.4 targets per game in the contest. Now we enter a situation between 2020 and 2021 where the Lions have parted ways with Adrian Peterson and Kerryon Johnson this offseason and lost their top 2 receiving weapons with Marvin Jones and Kenny G leaving town, vacating nearly 300 targets from last year. I think that DeAndre Swift's opportunity and talent really present a chance for this guy to be that elite all-purpose back that we covet in fantasy football. Looking at an Alvin Kamara type, looking at Aaron Jones type. Like, I can very well see DeAndre Swift entering that list. And if we're talking about a baseline, like if you were to tell me right now, DeAndre Swift is going to see between 250 and 300 opportunities, 90 targets, given the sheer lack of weapons that they have, I would absolutely believe you. Again, the only thing holding him back from even ranking higher on my list is the situation with the Lions. But in Dynasty, I will always bet on the talent and the usage long-term, both of which go in Swift's favor. Again, they could have added a receiver at 7. They could have added a defensive player at 7. You know what they did? They spent that 7th overall pick on a generational tackle prospect to further establish that offensive line, which only works in Swift's favor. So
it was already a pretty good offensive line to begin with.
Yes. I absolutely love Swift. And quite frankly, this is another guy I mentioned with Gibson, mentioned with Dobbins, mentioned with Akers. Are we running out of second picks? Because I would be fine taking any of these guys in the second round.
Right. And I think of the second-year running backs, I think Swift is going to lead these guys in targets too. Yeah, like even including Gibson, including Dobbins, including Cam Akers. I think this guy's going to receive the most targets out of any of them because, I mean, we know Jared Goff doesn't really like pressure. If he's under pressure because, you know, the Lions are beaten down in week 10 because they're, 2-8 or whatever, is he just going to dump the ball off to DeAndre Swift all the time? Because that's probably what I would do if I was Jared Goff and I'm under pressure and things of that nature. So, yeah, I think Swift is a guy that you really have to bet on the volume with initially, but I really think his breakout season is probably a year from now.
That's definitely
that's why I'm at 15 and you have him at 11. So if it were up to you, he would have been on this list.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I fully understand if you have him at 15 because he is a little bit riskier. But again, we mentioned it before. We are absolutely splitting hairs, even in the 6 to 15 area, fully depending on how you're constructing your team is how you can assemble this roster. If you can afford to maybe lose out a little bit on this year, but really stack forward for next year and the year on, DeAndre Swift is the perfect guy to get because I think next year on, we're talking about a guy who's going to be a top 7 overall PPR, top 10 overall half PPR running back year in and year out.
Right. And I'll just rip through basically our next couple of names just because all the guys that I wanted to talk about were in my top 12. So they're already in there. But so DeAndre Swift is our consensus RB13. Najee Harris is our 14. If you want to hear our thoughts on him, we've talked about it at nauseam.
Rookie video. Yep.
Yeah. Rookie running back rankings video. You can check that out. Aaron Jones, we already mentioned. He might be higher on this if it weren't for the Aaron Rodgers situation, but he's currently at RB15, just got himself a new contract, so you got some stability there. Travis Etienne, same as Najee Harris. Go check out that rookie running back video. CEH, we have at 17. I mean, we could talk a little bit more about this one just because it is a little bit more of a particular situation. I think with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and I'm going to say this all offseason, this is all a talent issue. Like, seriously, I think if he plays better, he will, everything will fall into place. Andy Reid will have him on the field for third down, so therefore he'll get more targets. He'll be the guy that we wanted him to be. The only concern I really have with CEH is he ever going to be the goal line back of that team, the full-time goal line back, because it didn't seem like he was very effective in that role, right? We saw him come out in week 1, and it took him 70 goal line carries before he could finally get into the end zone. So, I mean, CEH is a guy that I'm still willing to bet on. I still believe in him. I can't put him ahead of any of these other guys that we've talked about. And I would include the 2 top rookies in that discussion as well.
Yeah, and I fully agree. Again, I probably would slimly take him over ETN, but that's a coin flip for me. They are both kind of in that range. Man, CEH has all the opportunity in the world. If he can show a little bit more from the talent standpoint than he did last year in terms of being able to get the ball in the end zone, in terms of, to be honest, he was an efficient runner. It was really just the touchdowns that were affecting him. I think 17 could definitely be his floor, especially when you're talking about next year. If he has another breakout year, if he has a top 8, top 10 type finish this year in fantasy football, we're talking about a guy who's probably going to enter the top 6 or 7 overall values at the position. Like, that's how that's how great the situation is. If he proves the talent, he could be an absolute game record at this ADP. And so we're talking about he's 17. We're going to briefly talk about 18 and 20. Not really much. We'll just outline them. Devontae Williams, 18. We mentioned him in the rookie video, but as soon as Melvin Gordon leaves next year, this is his backfield. Expect a Josh Jacobs enhanced version going next year and on. And Joe Mixon's 19. You know what you're going to get. Going to be a volume dependent RB2 type, going to be pretty safe with his workload, but I don't really ever see him entering that top 6 to 8 upside similar to these other guys, or unlike these other guys, sorry. And number 20, same thing, David opportunity. He's named that for a reason. David Montgomery, opportunity. You guys have definitely heard that phrase by now, but he is all opportunity. It's not a great situation. I don't think he's a great talent, but if you're talking about a guy who's going to get...
He proved a little bit more last year. He definitely upgraded himself as a player in my eyes, but yeah, like you said, he's not a guy that is ever going to...
He's not special.
He's not a guy that's ever going to finish as a top 5 running back. It's just never going to happen. He probably won't even ever finish as a top 8 running back from a point per games perspective. So this is a guy that is a high-end RB2, and he could be very good for you as your RB2 or RB3 if you take a wide receiver early in a dynasty startup. But he's a guy that I'm taking all these second-year running backs over just because of the upside with them, and I'm taking all the 3 rookies over him too.
Yeah, and again, I'll quickly say before anybody rebuttals in the comments, like, oh, he was a top 5 back this year. James Robinson was the RB4. It was fully a volume thing. Once Tariq Cohen's back, once Damian Williams in town now, I do expect him to,
Plus, so many guys got hurt this year too.
Yeah, like
McCaffrey being hurt and those other guys being hurt, is the reason he finished as RB5. It's not, and he also had the easiest schedule of any running back I've ever seen.
Yeah. Just looking at his final 5 weeks is ridiculous because he had Green Bay twice, Detroit, who was the league worst.
To be fair, he'll play those teams again, obviously, because they're in his division.
Oh, definitely. No, I'm going to bring it out total, though. Green Bay, Detroit, Houston, Minnesota, Jacksonville, Green Bay.
Right, yeah, just the easiest stretch of games possible. And he definitely screams regression candidate for me, at least from that stretch, because he was the RB3 in fantasy from that point.
Yeah, no, definitely. He was an absolute stud. Just looking at those last 6 games of last year, 25.3 PPR points, 27.1, 24.5, 29.2, 20.1, and 28.2 to end the season. Yes, that definitely inflated his overall numbers when you look back on it.
I wouldn't blame if people think we're crazy for having him this low. I wouldn't blame you for taking a shot on David Montgomery. If you want to believe in it and take him ahead of a guy like CEH and put him as your RB17, if you believe in him over ETN, so you could put him RB16 or something like that. But that's probably about the highest I would go with.
Yeah, there's no shot I'm taking him over the guys you mentioned. DeAndre Swift's your 15, Harris, Jones. No shot you take him over those guys. But if you want to take him the early to mid 4th in your dynasty drafts, I think that's appropriate value.
Right.
Yeah, so with that being said, hopefully you guys made it this far in the video, and get ready for tomorrow. We're coming at you with the top 15 overall dynasty wide receivers. So stay tuned, because we talked about the variance in this video. There's more variance in that video, that's for sure, because you're going to be talking about 22-year-olds on one rank, and you're going to be talking about 29-year-olds the next. That's just how the receivers work. Anyways, take care, y'all. Anything you have to say before you head out, Bush?
No, pretty good. If you guys enjoyed, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Peace out, and enjoy your Friday.
Peace out, y'all.
Wire me the money.